Everybody, and welcome to day 17. I no longer have enough fingers to be able to put how many days we're up to, so welcome. We are absolutely in the home stretch of VID21. Thank you for joining us. If you are in Melbourne, you woke up to a cold one this morning. I think I just put about every layer I owned before I left the house, and so if you're somewhere else in the world and it's a bit warmer, congratulations, because winter is definitely arriving here. If you are joining us for our first session, welcome. If you are returning, welcome back. It's always great to see so many amazing people in these sessions and familiar names too. You've picked a good session to start the day. My wonderful friend, Michelle Bihary, is gonna teach us about leading above the line. And Michelle is an expert in people leadership and workplace resilience. She's passionate about helping leaders build high-performing, psychologically safe and thriving teams through leading themselves and others in engaging and intentional ways. Michelle applies practical insights from neuroscience and psychology and mental health research to create positive workplace ecosystems that genuinely cultivate human potential, productivity, engagement, and thriving employees. She's the author of Leading Above the Line, Applying Neuroscience to Build Psychologically Safe and Thriving Teams, and is a sought-after speaker, facilitator, trainer by leading organisations throughout Australia and New Zealand. And Michelle, you're in Melbourne as well, so we can keep warm together this morning, and it's so great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Julia. It's great to be here and wonderful contribute to this incredible conference, so thank you so much. I want to just start off sharing a little bit. I have had the incredible privilege last week to go up to Sydney from Melbourne to see a preview of the musical theatre production Hamilton. I have to confess, I am a bit of a musical theatre nutcase. I really enjoy musical theatre. It is one of my real passions and things. It is honestly a brilliant must-see production, and I believe that it's actually broken all of the records in terms of ticket sales for musical theatre in Australia. But what is so inspiring to me is how a show like that functions as a team. You sit there and you observe the performers on the stage. You know that there's an orchestra underneath the pit performing, and all the people controlling the lights and the stage. And you get a sense of what incredible teamwork and how that workplace must function in order for everyone to really shine. I think often in our leadership space, often there are metaphors from sport and sporting teams and things like that to look at incredible teamwork, and I think that's really valid. As well as that, however, I think there's so much value in looking at what happens in a show like Hamilton. I don't know if you're aware, but every musical theatre production actually runs 8 times a week. So they have an incredibly grueling schedule. It's like, like 8 VFL games across a week, from Tuesday to Sunday or from Wednesday to Sunday. There are 2 different schedules. I happen to know I have a close family member that works in theatre, and I think there are many inspiring lessons for us to learn from. One of the things is that the success of a show like that depends on every single person being at their best. Ego has no place, and that's a key insight that I have understood, that it is really about everyone shining and everyone working together to optimize everyone's potential in that environment. And in fact, all the most senior people, the producers, the directors, the writers, and so on, actually serve the workplace, serve everyone, the frontline staff, so to speak, who actually interact with the audience, the customers, actually are there to support people to build their potential and to really shine and thrive. And that is an incredibly inspiring model for us to consider in our work as self leaders, in terms of leading others and leading teams. So, what we need to think about is how do those theatre productions create such a healthy ecosystem rather, a healthy interpersonal ecosystem that's really built on helping everyone thrive and really bring out the best in everyone. For me, it really speaks to being above the line. It's all about people interacting in ways that are good for themselves and good for each other. And it's a very powerful role model. So I think it is a really important key. As I've mentioned, they have an incredibly grueling schedule. Stress is high. They're highly critiqued. Every performance is critiqued by the production team, but also by the audience. So their performance has got to be super high every performance. And the stakes are high. I mean, there's a huge investment in a musical theatre production. You know, they start casting about 18 months out. I mean, it's a long process. So there's a lot of investment in making it happen. So obviously, what's key is how they really function well above the line. And this is something I think it's just extremely helpful for us to understand. So, when I talk about above the line, what do I actually mean? What is above the line? What is below the line? And a good example that I share in my book is that, when you go into a milk bar, for example, or a 7-Eleven, and you purchase a carton of milk, you can have a very neutral transaction with the staff member, the shop assistant that helps you. You can just, be very black and white. Here's the money, thanks very much, and walk away. And it's quite a neutral sort of transaction. It doesn't affect us positively or negatively. It doesn't really add anything to our lives, doesn't detract either, and we don't take anything away from it. Clearly, above the line interactions are when we interact in ways that actually add value. So they're a positive interaction, and they can be, just even giving someone a big smile or saying hello and asking how their day are. It may not be enduring, but it is still um, a positive opportunity to interact, and it gives something to that person. It's elevating to their mood or to their well-being, or something like that. And generally a positive above the line interaction is good for both parties. So it's good for the giver and the receiver, and it creates a good and positive vibe. However, below the line interactions are much more unhealthy. They're negative. They're, often, the sort of things that we know are unlawful, like, the bottom of the scale, there's bullying and harassment and discrimination. So they're the very, very below the line behaviors. But there's also between those unlawful behaviors and there are more subtle behaviors which are to some degree unlawful, absolutely. Things like excluding people, bitching, gossiping, snide remarks, eye rolling, constantly being unnecessarily critical and judgmental. And those do not leave people feeling great. I mean, they're not good for everyone in a work environment, and they certainly really challenge an environment around its psychological safety because people don't feel safe. Um, and from a neuroscientific perspective, what I think is really super important is how we think about the brain. So, when I think about the brain, I particularly think a lot about the executive brain, which is the part of our brain here that sits behind our forehead, which is where our highest cognitive capacities operate. So it's our highest capacity to think, but also our highest capacity for the psychology of things, for the emotion of things, to understand what makes us and others tick. So it's also the place where we can learn and grow. It's a part of our brain where we can think about things from different perspectives. We can we're agile, we can see things in different sort of ways. It really is where we can think creatively, laterally, strategically, and in fact, it's where we make our best decisions from. So, above the line behaviors in any relationship, at home or at work, helps us function the most optimally from our executive brain. Unfortunately, below the line behaviors tend to trigger our amygdala and our brainstem. So, below the line behaviors, particularly those that make us feel uncomfortable or unsafe, that generate fear or conflict or stress, can really trigger the parts of our brain where we are more functioning from the lower parts. And when we're functioning from the lower parts of our brain, the amygdala and our brainstem, we tend to be more reactive, less proactive. We tend to be more win lose, right wrong, more competitive, because all of that part of the brain is about survival. It's not higher order functioning, it's actually more primitive functioning. And it means that what's happening is that we're functioning in such a way that is not as good for us to think, not as good for us to relate to others or to learn. So, this part of our brain, sure, it's really super important because it keeps us safe. It keeps us safe. It's constantly scanning our environment to make sure that we're physically and psychologically safe. But when it's switched on, it takes the focus away from our ability to use our executive brain functioning. And this is something that I think super important, that we work in environments that help us function optimally from the executive brain. Clearly, on Hamilton and any great musical theatre production that's functioning well, it needs to be relaxed enough. It needs to be psychologically safe enough that it's good for everybody to optimize their performance so they can think through what they're doing, so they're relating well to one another, and also so that they're able to learn and continually improve the quality of what they're offering. So, what are the practical applications or implications for this? And I think for me, thinking about the neuroscience from this perspective, I think there are three things that I'd really like to spend the rest of my time exploring with you. One is how to lead ourselves above the line. Secondly, how to lead others above the line. And then lastly, just some tips on leading a team above the line or thinking about how to create a healthy ecosystem rather than a toxic ecosystem where egos are all dominating and it's all about that. So, how do we lead ourselves above the line? Maybe a few sort of common barriers that I see both in the research and in my experience having worked across lots of industries all around Australia and New Zealand. What I see often is how people don't lead themselves particularly well. In fact, many people don't even think that self leadership being a thing, or not are unaware of how they're actually leading themselves. So for me, part of it is actually just even contemplating, what does self leadership look like? Does leadership just have to be about leading others out there? Or are we each leading ourselves? And in fact, we are, aren't we? 24/7, we have a relationship with ourselves. We're speaking to ourselves. And what does that look like? When I ask these questions, what I often find is that people are often unnecessarily very self critical. They criticize, a lot of their self talk is focusing on the negative. They might get through a day and do 10 things really well and one thing not as well. And what do they focus on? That one, as they're driving home or traveling home, that one thing that hasn't gone well, rather than the 9 or 10 things that went super well in that day. And what that does to the brain is that it reinforces, from a neuroscientific perspective, it reinforces the wiring of our brain to look for the negatives. So we don't realize that neuroplasticity and neuroscience teaches us that the more we look at things in a certain way, if we have a more negative way of thinking, we're building more neural pathways in that direction. And it makes it easier to go down that pathway. It really, in fact, creates a default setting where it's easy to go that way. It's actually harder and more effort to look for the positive. So it becomes our default setting over time. So that unnecessary self-criticism that not everyone is engaged in, but many people are, is not healthy self-leadership. Because it's not how we'd like to be led with others. And I guess, my tips in this area are, one, to become aware of that inner dialogue. That self awareness is gold. Making time daily or weekly, even just a few minutes, to reflect on, how are you speaking to yourself? Would you speak to yourself? Would you speak to someone else the way that you speak to yourself? The second tip in this area is, lead yourself the way you would like to be led by someone else. What I often notice in my conversations with people is the vast difference between the way that people would like to be led by someone else and the way they're actually leading themselves. And it's that tension or that difference that I think is really a powerful opportunity for us to bring together our own self leadership, our own self talk more in alignment with how we would like to be led by somebody else, and also how we like to lead others. So, if we're leaders, do we speak to others the way that we speak to ourselves? I think there's some really healthy reflection in all of that for each of us. Some key things. So, leading ourselves above the line means leading ourselves in ways that are balanced, that are aligned with what we know from research to be healthy, in a way that we lead others through being inspiring, to be positive, yes, to work on strengths and learning, strengths, but also to work on learning opportunities. We don't ignore those, but it is really about having better balance and being able to appreciate our skills and strengths and see our weaknesses as opportunities for growth and learning. That's healthy self leadership, not the incessant stream of self criticism that I see so many people undertaking. The second key area of leading above the line is to do with leading others in healthy ways. We really know, one of the things that I loved about Hamilton, and certainly reading a lot of the reviews about where a lot of the performers have come from and their experiences, and how this was a big step up for many of them, is how committed the producers, the directors, the choreographers, the acting coaches, the performance coaches are to help every one of those people shine, to be at the top of their game, to optimize every ounce of potential that they have. And I think this is the key for what needs to happen in our workplace, that we need to see ourselves as leaders as being the supporting act to those staff members, not the other way around. Hierarchies need to be reversed. It should be the customers at the top, obviously, the frontline staff next, and then leaders there to support and to help optimize leadership. So, what steps can we take to lead in above the line ways with others? A few key tips here is that we need to build positive relationships. We want to build a strong positive relationship, not a personal relationship necessarily, but a strong positive relationship with each of our staff, so that we get to know them well enough to know what makes them tick, to see how work enriches their lives, to have some understanding of that, to help identify their skills and strengths, and also absolutely to help support them to develop the skills that they are not developed yet, because we are all learners. We all have things where we need to learn and grow, and to support that in a positive way, not a shaming way, not a denigrating way, not through put downs, but in a positive way, to see when there are mistakes and failures and weaknesses and errors, to see them as incredible opportunities for growth and development, and to have the type of relationship that really supports that. I think our job is really to highlight and recognize skills and strengths, to be looking for those, to be identifying those, to give people feedback about those. It's often easier for someone else to see a person's skills and strengths than them to identify them themselves. We often have blind spots around our skills and strengths. So it's really helpful for us as leaders and colleagues to really identify those and to acknowledge them, not just to recognize them, but to put them into words and give people specific feedback about those. There's a lot of research that shows that often when we give positives in a workplace, that we actually only acknowledge effort or outcome. And although effort and outcome is super important, what's also important alongside that, and maybe even more important, are skills and strengths, because they're the things that we can really improve and work on. We may not always be able to fully impact outcomes because there are many other factors that influence outcomes, but we are in charge of how we build on our skills and strengths in our work environment. And that's extremely helpful for us to acknowledge with our colleagues and our staff. The next thing that I think is really important is really how do we go about supporting the learning of our staff, and how do we, again, not be punitive, but to really support and guide learning. And that's really the other key tip, I think, of leading others above the line, is being super committed to them shining like on stage. I mean, if someone's not doing well, I'm sure that what they do is the coaches, the performance coaches, the choreographers, and so on are looking to help extend that skill and support them. They don't shame people. They're really about building skills and really enhancing that skill base and their understanding so they can improve their performance through skill building, through skill development, and optimizing their talents. The third whole area that I wanted to talk about today was about how to lead teams above the line. Teams is different, isn't it, to the individuals? When we're leading individuals, it's about that one on one relationship. But when we're leading a team, it's not just about the one on one relationships, but it's also all about the interpersonal relationships. It's about the interactions, and it's very much that sort of thinking like the ecosystem. We think about a nature ecosystem where every part of that ecosystem, the behaviors, the nutrients, the toxins, all interact together to create something that's either thriving for everyone, or if it begins to have pockets of toxins, they can become viral and they can really dampen um, the uh, the good energy that exists within that environment. And goodness knows, here in Australia, we've certainly seen quite a bit of that in certain political systems of recent times. So, in a healthy, positive ecosystem, we need to really show how we cultivate those above the line interactions. Collaboration, recognition, valuing others, supporting learning in others, being inspirational towards one another. It's really about how we cultivate, how we recognize and reward those positive above the line behaviors, how we create psychological safety so people can be themselves and feel valued for who they are, regardless of what gender they are, what color they are, what background they have. That everyone is welcome, that everyone is valued. And there are things, if we're employed in a workplace, we've been employed for a reason, we've been employed for our strengths. And how do we find a way of really recognizing those and optimizing those? I think the tough role that often leaders in that environment have is how to address some of those toxic or more negative behaviors the below the line behaviors within a team environment where there's a bit of poor behavior, and some of it, as I mentioned, can be super below the line, the bullying, the harassment, discrimination. But much of that festers from the below the line behavior like snide remarks or humor at other people's expense when it goes too far. The eye rolling, the sort of shaming, the criticism unnecessarily, all of the things, the excluding people, the bitching, the gossiping, all of that festers as a toxin within that ecosystem, and it is mostly about people's ego. It is mostly about those people who operate like that are trying to sort of foster their own confidence or ego through putting down others, which is really unhelpful in any environment. I mean, can you imagine how that would work on Hamilton? It would just be awful. We need all those performers to be at their best to provide that best environment. And it's the same within our team environments. It's what we really need in any workplace. So, as I'm heading towards, some closing remarks, I guess what I really have wanted to explore with you is the way in which humans really need a psychologically healthy environment. We need an environment that does not continually trigger our reptile brain, that does not continually trigger our amygdala, because if that is happening, it's really hard for us to concentrate. It makes it much more exhausting to work hard. It makes it very wearing. And, again, there's an immense amount of research around that if we're in environments like that, it makes it harder even for us to sleep at night. There's even research to show that it makes it harder for our partner to sleep at night if someone's in an environment like that. So we definitely want to create and cultivate a healthy ecosystem where everyone is performing at their best. That's what's good for a business or for a workplace, because we then optimize the potential and we get the best outcomes from it for everyone. And it also helps us think well. It helps us relate well, and it helps us learn. So we're really investing in this growing learning organization, a learning culture, which is more innovative, more strategic, more creative, and it contributes not just to the individuals, but to the longer term sustainability and achievement of the organization as a whole. And how key and important is that? I want to say that, what we need to think about is to be aware of how we show up. And I guess that's, been highlighted in how we lead ourselves, how we lead others, and how we lead our teams. Be aware of how we show up each day. What energy are we bringing into all our interactions? I guess a bit of a rule of thumb is, I have the aim of at a minimum of not doing harm, of aiming in my every interaction to at least be neutral, if not positive, to share a laugh, to inquire how someone is, at the supermarket checkout or wherever it is. I always have this sort of idea that we can learn from everyone. We can always contribute in a positive way to everyone. And many people have a backstory. We don't know what's going on for others, but a little bit of kindness and respect goes a hell of a long way to building a positive culture at home and at work. Definitely invest time in our relationships with ourselves, with others, and our team. Having good reminders, and it might be a reminder on your phone, on your desk, or even, on your bathroom mirror in the morning, just to reflect on your day, reflect on how you're going to show up and how those relationships that are key are going for you, and what you want to do to invest and enhance them, how you can contribute to yourself, to your staff, and the ecosystem as a whole. And I think, like in Hamilton, what's really powerful is how everyone shows up with a positive vibe to really make sure. I just love being around theatre because it is all about that. It's all about bringing out the best in everyone. And I think it's a very motivating and inspiring way of being. So just, to leave this with some thoughts, I guess, I think we all have an opportunity to help ourselves and others actually soar above the line, soar high above the line. I think people need this. We've had a pretty tough year. Things are still a bit unsettled for many of us. Um, and creating a good environment helps people be resilient. It helps them cope with challenge. It gives them that stability to be at their best. Businesses need this, people need this, workplaces need this. And we need to stop squandering potential through below the line behaviours. We really want to create the environments that work, that are healthy, that are thriving, where everyone achieves. And that's really what I want to leave you with, Julia. I think that's, from me, my key points, and I'm looking forward to some questions and thoughts from others. But it is that inspiring that, I think we can all function really high and well if we have the support from everyone around us.
Thanks so much, Michelle. I love the reframe between ecosystem and ecosystem. I was just going back through some of the workplaces that I've been, some of the teams I've been part of, and there was definitely more egos than there should be. And yeah, having a healthy ecosystem, just as soon as you said it, I was just like, yes, 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 yes. So smart.
It is one of the chapters in my book, I will say.
Yeah, no, I just love the way that you take such a big topic and talk about it in such a crystal clear and beautifully reframed way. Sue asked, when you're in a toxic ego environment, what tips do you have for keeping yourself safe and well? I find my energy is affected in those environments. I have to work quite hard to keep my own focus in a positive space.
Mm-hmm. So I think two things is, or three things. One is to lead yourself well. So to have that, make sure that we have that, not collude with unnecessary self-criticism and lead ourselves really effectively. Secondly, is to look for people with that workplace environment, even to find one peer who's on the same page and cultivate a little bit of a positive ecosystem within the negative ecosystem. I think that is another starting point, and that's been something that I know a number of people that I've worked with over the years have found really helpful. And even to have a weekly lunch together or catch up, coffee or whatever, and do it in quite an intentional way so that you actually begin to collect almost those sorts of people. And people do that, through just social interaction, but also even, doing some reading about stuff like this or watching some inspiring TED Talks together. I mean, you can turn it into a learning opportunity that to build a momentum around something that's more positive. And the third thing, of course, is, having a coach or having or a mentor or someone that you can speak with regularly that also creates a value add in, because it is very draining, and we do need those anchor points around us that really builds that up. And I guess lastly, I mean, there comes a point at which being in a toxic environment is so detrimental to our health that we also need to ask ourselves the question: if a high functioning workplace is up here and a toxic workplace is down there on that continuum, at what point do we need to leave it? Yeah, to move on to something that's different. So I also, want to acknowledge that, because at some point it can be so damaging. And I've seen that time again. Before I became a leadership and resilience expert, I was a mental health clinician for many years, and part of what motivated me to, the shy introvert me to become to move into this space was the incredible trauma that I saw that toxic workplaces, the impact it had on so many people, and seeing people who were high functioning and healthy and well, and then became suicidal from the sort of trauma of bullying and harassment and discrimination. It's gobsmacking, and it's one of the most, and I've seen a lot of that over many years, and that's been a very concerning. So I need to acknowledge that. I think there are times that we've got to call it quits and move on somewhere else because of toxicity.
Sue's asked, I'd like to learn more about neuroplasticity and understand more about reprogramming neural pathways. Do you have some advice on reading or research I can access?
Absolutely. So Rick Hanson, Hanson, Rick Hanson is a really renowned expert on positive neuroplasticity. I've done a 6-day intensive training with him about 3 years ago. So he is one of, to me, the gurus of this. His work is much more individually focused and applying to individual well-being than workplace well-being. I've taken his work and applied it and thought about it a lot in this environment, but his work is brilliant, and he has a Foundations of Wellbeing program which runs over 12 months, and it's very reasonable and it is excellent. But he also has lots of videos that you can learn from him without investing at that level. Dr. Daniel Siegel, who is a child and adolescent psychiatrist, they're both of these gentlemen are prolific writers, and they both work in that sort of mental health space. So he has also written a lot of books about how he uses neuroplasticity. So his book Mindsight would be a really good one. Or I could recommend every one of Rick Hanson's books for this purpose, and Dan Siegel's book Mindsight, but he's got many others as well. They'd be two great starting points, because I know there are a lot of people around who have just done, a little thing on neuro leadership or something, but don't really have that depth. We've all studied neuroanatomy, neurophysiology, neuropsychology in our undergraduate training, and then have kept up to date with the evidence and research as it's emerged. So they're two people that I highly recommend who've got a lot of depth.
Perfect. I think the amount of books that have been purchased as part of VID21, if I got a little bit of commission for recommendations, I need a bigger library. I know between Sarah and I, we've ordered several books already, so my reading is sorted for the rest of the year. One of the things that I've reflected on a bit through VID and places I've worked is where you almost have layers of toxicity. So your boss is under pressure because their boss is putting them under pressure, because their boss is putting them under pressure. And we saw that a lot last year, particularly as people were reacting to COVID and the pandemic, sort of push people's heads down, for lack of a better way of describing it. Have you got any tips when you're in that sort of place? Because I've had leaders where I can see what's happening, and the pressure that they're under. Is there anything we can do in that space?
Yeah, I think a few things. One is, it's so great when you can recognize that, because then you're not taking it personally. Yeah, and when you don't take it personally, it doesn't impact your physiology as significantly. So that is one thing, and definitely doing that yourself with a peer or with someone external is invaluable. Again, which harks back to my response to the earlier question. I think it is that. Secondly, what is so good is that workplaces and boards are increasingly under pressure to build psychologically safe environments, not just physically safe environments. So I love all the research that's come out of Safe Work Australia as an example, but similarly in the UK, there's there's a whole work stress under their HSE. So if you go to I think it's hse.gov.uk, and in Canada, they're doing lots of work under Guarding Minds, I think it's called, or something like that, that you can easily access it. So you can see globally there are organisations that are all on about really focusing on the sort of well-being of people and psychological safety and what rights people have. And I think that's also useful to know that your experience that what you're experiencing is a below the line and that it's not acceptable. But it is, and just even acknowledging that again means that we don't take it personally.
Yeah, and one more question, then we'll finish. What is the physiological reaction when you take it personally? Is that the embedding of negative pathways?
Absolutely. So when it impacts two ways. So one is that it creates a rise in cortisol. So I haven't mentioned the chemical side of things. I've just focused more on the neural pathways and the neuroplasticity. But the other part of that is adrenaline and cortisol get secreted in increasing amounts when we are under way too much stress or when we don't feel psychologically safe. So again, when we're functioning from here, we also get those high levels of cortisol and adrenaline being secreted, which contributes to immune stress, illness, lack of sleep. It's very negatively impactful on our body and our health, our physical health, our emotional health, our mental health. So it has a very negative and serious impact. And again, that's why all of the safe work type organisations globally are increasingly researching this because it is so bad for people and their health and well-being. And there's, again, immense amount of research about that. And if anyone wants something further, I mean, certainly reach out. I'm very happy for anyone just to email me and I can I've got lots of sourced resources and I can add to what I've mentioned already.
I know when Mark Wales spoke, I think it was day 3, so he spoke about his time in Afghanistan and his former SAS officer, and was talking about the observations of being in the military, which you would imagine is a above the line situation, but you're in a below the line environment, if that makes sense. But also the effects that he saw in Afghanistan and then the effects he's seen since, particularly working with businesses when like that extreme adrenal fatigue and that is a slippery slope to trauma and post-traumatic stress and some of those extreme mental health issues that we see, particularly with people in the military. But what he was talking about is the challenges that we faced, particularly in business over the last year, psychologically are no different. We've all been under an enormous amount of stress, and it's how do we get ourselves back above the line. So I could listen and talk about this all day. I find this whole topic fascinating. The more Sue said, yes, that blew my mind. The comparison between the war zone and corporate arena was very powerful. So wonderful session. Michelle, we need to catch up and have lunch and chew the
Definitely.
fat and do that now that we're allowed to. So thank you so much for coming to join us. It's always great. I love how deep your research is and how beautifully you present it every single time we talk. So thank you so much, and thanks everyone that joined.